Okay, guys, welcome to a guide to question 2, Weimar Germany A-level history. Okay, so just a quick reminder of what you're going to see in the exam. Okay, question 1, obviously you're looking at 3 primary sources. What you're going to be presented with in question 2 is 2 extracts, and it's important to use the word extract as opposed to sources. Technically, these are secondary sources, but we are going to use the word extract in the exam. So what you'll have is 2 extracts with 2 different interpretations from 2 different historians. So there'll be no primary sources, just extracts from historians. And what you'll also be provided with is an interpretation, an original interpretation. So in this case, how valid is the view that the Treaty of Versailles was the main reason for the rise of the Nazi Party by 1933? Okay, so when we engage with the original interpretation, it's really important because this is going to be the focus of the question. So for those who've been doing some revision, you might spot straight away that the fact that they're saying the Treaty of Versailles was the most important reason for the rise of the Nazi Party is actually a traditional view on this topic. But if nothing else at this stage, it's important to engage and remember the focus and the original interpretation. So what I would do is I would get your green and your pink highlighters out at the ready because they're going to be very, very important in question 2 for highlighting and annotating the extracts. The first thing I would do in the exam is I would get your green highlighter and I would highlight the original interpretation because both extracts are going to be compared to this, and you're going to be looking for evidence that agrees with the original interpretation and evidence that disagrees. Okay, so I'm not going to read through the source with you. Okay, so this is an extract from Dr. Edward Halstead, writing in 1965. So when you work through this interpretation, feel free to pause the video and read through it. You're going to see here that it is completely agreeing with the original interpretation. Straight away from the first line, the Treaty of Versailles was the crucible in which Nazi support was forged. All the way through it, it's backing up the original interpretation, supporting the original interpretation, and all of the evidence in here is quite clearly backing up that the Treaty of Versailles was the most significant factor. Nice and straightforward. So in terms of what else I might scribble around the interpretation or what I might take away from that is it's clear just from my highlighting that extract 1 strongly agrees. The Treaty of Versailles was the main factor in the fall of the Weimar and the rise of the Nazi Party. Okay, also what I might be able to take from this is I'm going to have a little look at the original interpretation, at the interpretation in the question, in the extract, and clearly this interpretation focuses on a large external event, so in this case the Treaty of Versailles, and like I said, if you've done a little bit of revision on this, you'll be able to identify that that is a traditional approach or traditional interpretation. Okay, so when we have a look at interpretation 2, extract 2, it's often one of these extracts at least will be a little bit more challenging and will do something other than just completely agree. So I've gone through this one and lots of it seems to disagree. So for example, the first line, Versailles alone paved way for Hitler is a simplistic myth. So in other words, the Treaty of Versailles on its own can't explain this. There is a little bit of a nod to the importance of the treaty. While the treaty caused resentment, all the way through it, however, this historian, writing in 1998, is actually bringing up other factors as well. So the true turning point was the Great Depression. So again, that's a traditional approach. That's looking at a big external factor. However, look at all the other more nuanced factors that this historian brings in. Okay, the skill of the Nazis in exploiting the crisis, the elite deals that were made between politicians, the failures of the Weimar Republic and the democracy, the role of conservative elites, for example, the global economic collapse, which is another external factor, and also the political miscalculation and economic catastrophe. So, in other words, this is saying this wasn't just one thing. This wasn't just the Treaty of Versailles. It wasn't just the impact of the Great Depression. It was both big external factors and internal factors as well, which should start getting you to think about what type of interpretation this is. So all of the red in the highlighting suggests that it strongly disagrees with the interpretation. The Great Depression was the main factor, but also it was a combination of factors such as the Versailles Treaty and other more smaller internal factors like the failures of the Weimar politicians, for example. So therefore, This interpretation focuses on a variety of both large external events as well as internal issues. So this is therefore a more post-revisionist interpretation. So they're saying it's a combination of the big factors and the smaller factors, which is more of the grey area that post-revisionists in the modern era look at. So if we have a little look how we are going to break down this essay, the first section is where you're looking to outline three possible interpretations. Now, the good news is that this is fairly straightforward. So outlining three interpretations, addressing the question, and if you're confident enough, make a judgment in the introduction on which one of the three you think is more suitable. In terms of how long the section should be, not particularly long. I have one full paragraph, three strong sentences, and this first section will be intact. So let's have a little look what this could look like. The interpretation that the rise of the Nazi Party was down to the impact of the Treaty of Versailles is true to an extent. So what the student has done here is they've addressed the question and they've also made a judgment there and said the original interpretation is valid to an extent. An alternative to this traditional interpretation is that the rise of the Nazi Party was down to several external events, such as the Treaty of Versailles and the Wall Street crash. Okay, so this person is providing an alternative interpretation. A second one there just happens to be a traditional view. And this is the skillful bit. A third and more suitable interpretation, so that's a judgment, would be that the rise of the Nazi Party was a complex combination of external and internal factors. So this student actually agrees with extract 2, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, okay? You can agree with the original interpretation, you can agree with either of the extracts, or you can provide your own interpretation. All of them are acceptable. And then we're straight into the next section, which is the development of the debate. And this is going to come down to if you've done a little bit of revision on your crash course booklets to understand some of the traditional revisionist and post-revisionist arguments. So what are you looking to do in this section? You're looking to outline on the development of the debate using the crash course guide, showing a real quick understanding, a precise understanding of traditional revisionist views on this specific issue. So this should be, again, around 3 full sentences, 1, maybe 2 paragraphs, so a little bit longer. Again, if you're watching this and thinking I wouldn't know how to do this section, go back to your crash course and there are 5 different pages on these different debates. This one is the one that we'd be looking at for this exam paper, the rise of the Nazi Party. I won't read through it with you, but there is a little bit of a breakdown of the development of the debate. Are you going to write all of that out? Of course not, okay? But you'd probably summarize that into a sentence each and show the examiner you were aware of the development of the debate. So what would that actually look like in reality? The traditional interpretation, created in the decades after the fall of the Weimar Republic, claimed that external events such as the Treaty of Versailles and the Wall Street crash were to blame. So this is outlining the traditional view on this specific subject. Revisionist historians challenged this view and claimed that it was internal issues such as the failure of the Weimar politicians or the weakness of German democracy. That's the revisionist view. Post-revisionist historians reconcile these views and outline how it was a complex combination of both external and internal factors that led to the rise of Adolf Hitler. So you have 3 full sentences there that give you a real good understanding. It shows the examiner, that you have an understanding of the development of the debate. A little bit of a warning with this, okay? If you are in the exam and you are short of time, you can skip this section, okay? As long as you perhaps mention traditional revisionist or post-revisionist in your answer, you can still pick up the marks. So this is the first bit of exam advice. If you are worried about time, ditch this section and you can make up the marks at another time. Okay, so we've done our introduction. We've addressed the question, made a judgment, and spoke about the debate. We're now going to look at extract 1 and 2, and this is how we break this down. So first of all, what we got to remember when we're talking about the extracts, the first thing is there's 2 words you've got to remember: how and why. How and why. So first of all, comment on how the extract agrees or disagrees. So this is a fairly straightforward bit. You've already highlighted extract 1 in green, so therefore it fully agrees, and you've just got to give a bit of evidence from the extract. Add in your contextual knowledge, that's important, so back up your statements with a little bit of own knowledge. And then the why section is, why does the historian arrive at that view? And again, refer back to the question. Again, how long should this be? Two chunky paragraphs, I would say. Let's have a little look at what it looks like in reality. So the first bit, the first stage, is you're talking about how does the extract agree or disagree. And you've actually done all of the hard work here when you have highlighted the extract. It could look something as simple as this. Extract 1 strongly agrees with the interpretation and outlines how the Treaty of Versailles led to the fall of democracy in Germany. So you've said in one sentence there that the extract agrees strongly, and you're reinforcing the original interpretation. This is how straightforward it can be. Halstead highlights how the treaty caused economic ruin, that's from the extract, and national resentment, also from the extract, creating a shadow over Germany that made the fall of German democracy inevitable, another key word from the extract. Halstead also highlights the November criminal's perception and the stab in the back myth, also from the extract. All of this is just from the extract. Both led to anger and resentment amongst Germans desperate for someone to blame. A little bit of own knowledge there. Halstead also claims that the treaty created an environment for an extremist revival. So all the students has done there really is said what is in the extract. This is the important bit. Add a little bit of your own knowledge. The Treaty of Versailles humiliated Germany with harsh reparations, territorial losses, and military restrictions from June 1919. Under the War Guilt Clause, Germany accepted full responsibility for the war, fueling resentment. This is all own knowledge about what is said in the extract about the Treaty of Versailles. It was forced to pay 132 billion gold marks, very specific knowledge, in reparations, crippling the economy and causing the 1923 hyperinflation crisis. The treaty stripped 13% of German land, including the Saar Basin and Alsace-Lorraine, weakening the economy and increasing nationalist anger. Again, all own knowledge to back up what was said in the extract. And that is the end of the first stage. How does the extract agree? Using the extract and your own knowledge. The next bit is where you really pick up marks with the examiner. You've comment on what what the extract says, okay, and how it agrees or disagrees. But now you've got to look at why. And this is where we have a little closer look at the provenance or attribution of the source. So we're going to ask questions such as when was the extract written? What is the focus of the historian? Is there any clues to that? Can we identify whether they are traditional, revisionist, or post revisionist? And can we have an educated guess as what type of sources this historian may or may not have used? This is how it might look in reality. Writing in 1965, the historian was working in relatively close proximity to the events, allowing access to primary sources. Their traditional approach aligns with historians of the time, which often emphasize major external factors. In this case, the focus is on the Treaty of Versailles as a decisive cause, reflecting a broader trend in mid 20th century historiography that attributed Germany's political collapse to punitive post war conditions rather than internal weaknesses. This historian does not have the advantage of works of historians that would challenge these views. In other words, this historian was writing in 1965, is taking a traditional approach. It is the obvious and big answer, and these are the first sets of historians that are looking to understand this period. So this student has done that very well. And then we finish off with a mini judgment. Overall, this extract supports the original interpretation that the Treaty of Versailles was the main factor. However, it omits many other factors that should be considered. Now, remember, this student at the start is arguing that it is a combination of factors. So what this student has skillfully done here is said, yes, the Treaty of Versailles was important, but it was actually part of a bigger picture. So this actually aligns with the original judgment very well. This is the tricky bit. You've got to come up with a third interpretation. Often it can be something that is within the extract that you can pick out, or it can be something that you think of from your own knowledge. So you're providing a third interpretation that is different in some way to the extracts. As I said, it could be something that was featured in the extract, but it has to be something that is a different overall conclusion. You add your own contextual knowledge about the interpretation you provided. And again, it's the same thing of how and why, telling us why a historian would arrive at that particular view. Again, around 2 full paragraphs. Once again, lean on your crash course. If you've learned this fairly well, you'll be able to pick out some of the. So, for example, here, if I have a little look at the revisionist one, I can see in there that it's talking about external factors, blah, 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 failures of mainstream political parties. There's one I could pick, weaknesses of democratic institution. There's another one I could pick. You get the idea, okay? The Nazis capitalizing on discontent. That's a third. Or if you're really, really struggling in the exam, you can combine the extracts and come up with more of a post-revisionist view that takes both of those things into account. So possible OPIs for this one option is I could just talk about the impact of the Wall Street crash. That was mentioned in extract 2, but I could take that as a main interpretation. I could talk about the role of Adolf Hitler, both traditional viewpoints. I could take more of a revisionist one, as I've explained, the weaknesses of German democracy, the failures of the politicians and Hindenburg, the rise of extremism. All of these are revisionist, and all of these are in your crash course. I could talk about the overuse of Article 48, which is more of a revisionist. Remember, revisionism is smaller internal problems. Or I could go along the lines of both external and internal factors, which is more post revisionist, but actually extract 2 is doing that. So I'd probably avoid that one on this occasion. Or, as always, a combination of all factors, which is the post revisionist approach. So, what would this look like in reality? Another possible interpretation would take a more revisionist approach and blame the fall of the Weimar on the failure of the Weimar politicians. So, this is a third new interpretation that the student is introducing. For example, you've got no extract now, okay? So you've got to bring in your own knowledge this time, even more so. So I won't go through this. Feel free to pause this and read it, okay? Because I won't read through it. But this is basically the student outlining the failures of people like Hindenburg, von Papen, Schleicher. The third interpretation, the OPI, is the failure of the politicians, and this candidate is skillfully given examples of this. So this is the important bit. Why would the historian arrive at this view? So a historian adopting a revisionist view would likely emphasize internal political failures over external events. With greater access to archival sources and hindsight, they may challenge earlier views, such as blaming the Versailles Treaty or the Depression alone. Over time, historical writing evolves as new sources are uncovered and as historical methodologies shift. For instance, post World War II historians had access to newly declassified materials and could approach the history of the Weimar with more context and nuance. It is likely that the revisionist historian would build upon the work of traditional historians using newly uncovered source material. So, this person here is describing why a historian would arrive at a revisionist view, which is the other possible interpretation. Brings us right to the end, and this can be fairly simple. You've got to bring this whole thing together and you've got to answer the question directly. Overall, the traditional view that the Treaty of Versailles was the main factor in the fall of German democracy is partly valid. So this student is saying, yes, that has some merit, but I think I know what's coming because there was a clear judgment in the introduction. A more suitable interpretation would be that the fall of German democracy was a combination of both external events, such as the Wall Street crash, and internal problems, such as the weaknesses of the Weimar government. This post revisionist view offers a more balanced interpretation on a complex event. So, this student was confident enough to not only answer the question directly, but provide what they think is a better example. Some quick tips, okay? If you are running out of time, you can scrap the first 2 sections. Okay, if you're really pressed for time, you can go straight into extract 1, extract 2, and your third OPI. If you're struggling, there's nothing wrong with that. What you can do if you're up against time is you can talk about traditional post-revisionist and revisionist viewpoints within your answer, and you can outline 3 interpretations in your judgment. So it's just a little tip. If you're struggling for time and you think, gosh, I'm up against it in question 2, take away those first 2 sections and go straight into the bottom 4. Okay, thank you guys. Hopefully that was useful.